Well, more buyers are returning to the property market, but listings aren't keeping pace.
To explain what's happening, we're joined by Nerida Conisbee, Chief Economist for the REA Group. Tell us more, Nerida.
Yeah, look, we are continuing to see surge on realestate.com.au. So we're particularly in Sydney, we're seeing very, very high levels of activity, but really extending across to all of Australia. At the same time, listings continue to be down. So we saw a bit of an uptick in Adelaide and Canberra and Darwin last month, but November, things are looking down again.
There we go, there's the graphic.
So the higher views are more like Sydney, Melbourne and Hobart, which we always keep mentioning with you.
I know, Hobart is always on there, but at the moment the top 10 is actually dominated by Sydney and to a lesser extent Melbourne. So you can see there premium Sydney in particular. At the moment, Northern Beaches is not just leading the way in terms of search, but also in terms of price growth. It's actually the strongest price growth area. But eastern suburbs is there, North Sydney, also Melbourne outer east, which is a little bit unusual, but very, very strong activity in Sydney at the moment.
It's interesting that Hobart is always mentioned because for a long, long time it never was.
Yeah.
The Tasmanian market never moved.
I know, probably for about 2 decades.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Beautiful. Salamanca Markets, Battery Point. You've got Mona.
Mona, yeah. It's a change in the economy. I mean, the area was always an agriculture and government-run town, but it is now a very strong tourism area, great foodie culture. So education's actually really strong there as well at the moment.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. Now, price growth has returned, of course, but will it help the economy?
Yeah, so the issue is around listings. So on one hand, you know, people do like price growth and they do feel better when prices are increasing. And, you know, we can see it with confidence levels that it does make a difference. But to really drive the economy, we do need more building taking place, which we're not yet seeing much of an uptick in approval. We're starting to see a few data points coming through that are looking far more positive. But the other thing that we really need is turnover of stock. So we're not seeing an uptick in listings, as I mentioned before, and that has a flow-on impact in terms of things like stamp duty revenue. It impacts retail trade. We know that when people move home, they often buy more white goods, more furniture. It really picks up there. Even new car purchases do seem to pick up when we see a high level of transactions taking place. People will often decide to buy a new car as part of a home purchase.
Now, if you're lucky enough to be able to afford a house with a tennis court, a swimming pool, both, what are the comparisons?
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a look this week for our news site as to whether a tennis court or a swimming pool adds value, and it's always one of those things that people say don't add a pool, doesn't add value. But what we do find on our site is that swimming pool is almost always the top keyword search in Australia. Like, depending where you are, we see it very, very strong in places like Queensland and New South Wales. Hobart, not so much. But swimming pool's very popular. Tennis court, not so much. So, you know, I think tennis courts were very popular in the 80s, but we know we don't see quite as much activity on the site as we see compared to swimming pools.
Well, there's a lot of land, isn't there, obviously, when you have a tennis court. You don't really want a half court, but you could go for a spa or a swimming pool that's a bit smaller, I guess.
Yeah, you could do a plunge pool, but you're trying to get a mini tennis court doesn't quite work. No. So I think, and people's shrinking block sizes make a difference as well, so it becomes quite difficult.
It's long been referred to as the Australian dream to own your own home. How obsessed are Australians with property?
So obsessed. We do a property seeker survey every year, and what we found was that, you know, there's obviously a distinction between people buying and renting, but when we have a look at people who define themselves as just loving to look around the market, or, you know, state that that's one of their main activities, we have found that half of Australians routinely property dream. So it's quite different to what we say. Asian countries are quite similar. We can see in many Asian countries that they are quite obsessed with property, but, you know, many European countries, we just don't see the same level of obsession that we see in Australia.
Now, this time of year is obviously the rush to Christmas, New Year. What are the clearance rates like across the country for this time?
Yeah, so it's actually a really busy auction time. Today will be a very, very busy auction time. We're starting to see auction numbers get closer to where they were last year. So they were well down for most of the year. We saw one weekend where Melbourne auction levels were higher than last year, but that was only one weekend. We do expect clearance rates to remain high. You know, we can see search is up. We can see that prices growth is returning. Not much stock on the market. You know, there's low interest rates. People are really fired up in terms of buying, but still very few people wanting to sell.
A lot of Australians see the property market as their liberation, don't they? As that extra little thing that they can take forward into their superannuation, into their retirement.
Yeah, look, I mean, we do look at property quite differently, and a lot of it has to do with that. A lot of our wealth is tied up in property, and you know, when prices are dropping, it is quite, you know, when people have got so much invested in their properties, it does make a difference to how people feel. The other issues around investors, you know, we know Australian property is very, very low yielding, so you know, you may buy something in Sydney on a 2.5, you know, sub 2% yield, which you know isn't a great return, but you do rely on capital growth to be able to make money. So you know, we do have property investors that really need a little bit of, you know, at least some price growth. We've got people who own their own properties who feel far better when they get price growth. So it does make a difference to consumer confidence.
Yes, and always talking about Hobart. They've got some beautiful homes there too, don't they?
Right. Well, Launceston now we are
Launceston
seeing
as well. Yeah, we always talk about Launceston. Thanks, Nerida.
Thanks for having me.
I'd fade away to a block of flats if I lived in Hobart. The food and
Oh, so beautiful.
love it.
Yeah.